Envision a massive mountain shrouded in dense clouds. From a distance, everything appears frigid, gray, unattainable. Most people look upon it and assume that only harshness, icy winds, and perilous paths reside there. Yet, those who have dared to ascend a little higher know that something astonishing awaits at the summit. A warm lake fed by melting glaciers, a tranquil field where flowers bloom even amidst the rocks, and a vista that transforms anyone who manages to reach it. The spiritual wisdom imparted by Florence Scovel Shinn operates precisely in this manner. She does not claim that the mountain vanishes, nor does she promise a life devoid of challenges, but she assures us that if you learn to look beyond appearances, you will discover that the summit always holds something invisible from the base. Often, the issue is that most people believe difficulty is an insurmountable wall. Florence maintained that difficulty is merely the mist preceding a grand gateway. Have you ever felt this way? Gazing at your life and feeling that everything became burdensome simultaneously? An unforeseen bill, a family dispute, a venture that didn't materialize as desired, an opportunity that seemed flawless and simply slipped through your fingers? We have all experienced such days. Days when life challenges us, tests us, and pushes us to our limits. Florence asserted that these moments are not punishments, but rather signals. Signals that something greater is striving to be born. Signals that you are being shifted toward a place more commensurate with your true self. But it is difficult to perceive this in the heat of pain. It is hard to accept it when fear grips the heart. And this is why today you will hear something utterly different from what the world tells you. You will hear that nothing, absolutely nothing, is random. Moreover, that which appears to be tearing you down may be precisely what is quietly elevating you. Allow me to share a few stories with you. Fresh stories, true accounts, narratives of individuals undergoing periods that anyone would label as failure, yet who, by adhering to the principles of Florence Scovel Shinn, managed to alter not only the course of their circumstances but the trajectory of their very consciousness. Because this is what she taught, abundance is not born in the bank account, it originates in the mind. And when the mind aligns itself, life responds. The first story is Heitor's. Heitor was 41 when he witnessed his small furniture restoration workshop begin its decline. He had always worked with wood since his youth, learning the craft from his grandfather, an artisan. He established his own space, cultivated a roster of steady clients, and, while living modestly, maintained a comfortable existence. However, over the course of several months, commissions began to dwindle. Digital platforms proliferated, and he was left behind. Consumers started gravitating toward prefabricated, convenient, and inexpensive furniture options. Heitor struggled to maintain his composure, but the rent fell behind. Once, then twice, then 3 times. One day, the building's landlord hammered on the door and declared, "You have 1 week to vacate the premises." A profound chill ran through Heitor's entire body. How was he supposed to start over? Where would he store his equipment? How would he provide for his household? He left the building, sat on the curb, and wept the kind of tears he hadn't shed since childhood. That very night, whether by sheer coincidence, or by providence, as Florence would term it, he stumbled upon a video discussing her teachings. He heard a phrase that seemed to penetrate his core as if it had been written specifically for him. Nothing that is yours can be taken away. If it has vanished, it is because that was not the correct form for it to remain. Initially, Heitor felt resentment. How could something so devastating possibly be correct? But for the first time in recent memory, he decided to attempt a different approach. Instead of succumbing to despair, he allowed himself to breathe. And in that moment of calm, he recalled an old aspiration: teaching others his knowledge. His grandfather always insisted that those who master a trade must pass it on. He had never made room for this endeavor because he was too preoccupied trying to keep the workshop afloat. But now there was no workshop. After days of profound reflection, he made a bold decision. He would liquidate some of his tools to purchase a high-quality camera, set up a simple area in his home garage, and begin recording instructional videos on restoration techniques. It was a complete pivot. Something he would never have contemplated had he not been forcibly removed from the premises. Within a few months, one of his videos went viral. People from across the nation began requesting comprehensive courses, mentorship programs, and step-by-step guides. The workshop that had been dying became the gateway to an entirely new life. Not only did he recover his income, but he multiplied it significantly. Furthermore, he now worked close to his family, maintaining better hours, fueled by purpose, and operating with a palpable sense of ease. Reflecting on his journey, Heitor remarked, "Had I remained confined to that workshop, I would never have uncovered this potential. What I called a tragedy was merely the universe reorganizing my trajectory." A statement that seems lifted directly from the writings of Florence Scovel Shinn. The second story concerns Elisa, a teacher who had dedicated nearly 2 decades to working at a private school. She adored teaching, was beloved by her students, and respected by the staff, yet something in her personal life was crumbling. A long marriage was drawing to a close, her brother had lost his job, and her emotional well-being was gradually being depleted. Amidst this turmoil, the unexpected occurred. The school announced cutbacks, and her salary would be reduced. It was not a termination, but it felt nearly as devastating. She felt devalued, betrayed, and diminished. It was then, while speaking with a friend, that she learned about Florence's spiritual tenets. She read a passage that stated, "When something narrows, it is because something greater is attempting to be born." Elisa began repeating this as a mantra, even though she didn't fully subscribe to it initially. But the repetition created the space for her to realize something that had been dammed up for years. She had always dreamed of writing children's books, but had never found the time, the courage, or the opportunity. The pain became so acute that, for the first time, she found herself compelled to focus on what she truly desired. And late one afternoon, she penned the first page of a book. Without pretense. Without expectation. Just writing. From that point onward, something shifted within her. She began writing every day. When she completed the manuscript, she submitted it to a few small publishing houses without high hopes. Within 3 months, she received a positive reply. The book was going to be published. None of this would have transpired had her stability not been shaken. None of this would have been born without that salary reduction she initially cursed so vehemently. Florence Scovel Shinn often stated that life sometimes needs to exert pressure so we can shed old shells. And that is precisely what Elisa experienced. An expansion that emerged from constriction. These stories demonstrate something Florence explained with great clarity. Appearances are deceiving. What seems like loss may be a beginning. What appears to be a threat may, in fact, be liberation. What looks like chaos may be precisely the divine reorganization intended to position you exactly where you were meant to be from the start. The third story illustrating the principles taught by Florence Scovel Shinn is that of Samuel, a man who had always prided himself on his self-discipline. At 52, he was employed by a logistics firm and adhered to a nearly immutable routine. Arriving early, leaving late, meeting every target, and taking on responsibilities that did not even belong to him. For decades, he believed that the more he guaranteed the stability of everyone else, the more secure he himself would be. Yet, life has a curious way of revealing that security predicated solely on physical effort and stringent discipline is akin to building a house upon sand. One day, following an internal audit, the company decided to restructure its framework. Several departments would be automated, processes streamlined, and a portion of the team reassigned. Samuel did not lose his job, but he was transitioned into a completely different role, one he did not master and which required digital competencies he had never needed to cultivate. He felt old, displaced, and obsolete. He began to contemplate that perhaps he had spent too much time serving a system that ultimately failed to value him. It was during this period that a colleague left a book with a red cover and gold lettering on his desk. It was one of Florence Scovel Shinn's classics. He started reading casually, intending only to dispel his sadness for a few hours, but soon found himself immersed in something that seemed written precisely for that moment in his life. There was a sentence that read, "The universe never takes away a position without offering a better one, provided the individual receives what appears to be a loss with faith." Samuel took a deep breath. The words were simple, yet they awakened something dormant within him. For the first time in many years, He allowed himself to question whether he truly wanted to remain there. And in questioning, he realized a truth he had always circumvented. He possessed a passion for teaching. He had always enjoyed explaining processes to new colleagues, was consistently patient with those learning, and frequently received accolades for his clarity. But he had never permitted himself to consider this a viable career path. With a blend of fear and resolve, Samuel began studying nightly, took short courses on corporate education, and decided to attempt something audacious. He submitted his resume to 2 firms specializing in corporate training. To his astonishment, he received a reply from one of them. And even more surprisingly, after an extensive discussion with the manager, he was hired as an in-house instructor. He began earning a higher salary, working fewer hours, and for the first time, felt that his natural aptitude was being utilized to its fullest extent. When he reflected on the situation, he realized that the forced transition at his former company was not a humiliation. It was the necessary impetus for him to occupy the place that had always been his. Florence asserted that when life displaces us, it is not expelling us, it is beckoning us to the next level. The 4th narrative centers on Rafaela, a woman consistently perceived as excessively strong. From a young age, she was compelled to care for her siblings, sustain the household, and undertake decisions that most adults would shun. She forged an emotional resilience that seemingly rendered her invulnerable to everything. However, such fortifications can also become self-imposed confinements. At the age of 36, she confronted an unimaginable ordeal, a severe anxiety episode that necessitated an immediate leave of absence from her job. Abruptly, the woman accustomed to regulating every aspect of her life found herself powerless to govern her own physiological responses. Tachycardia, insomnia, memory lapses. She felt shattered, profoundly vulnerable, and utterly adrift. It was at this juncture that she began researching spirituality and stumbled upon an audio recording detailing the power of words, one of the foundational tenets of Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. She listened intently as Florence stated that the body responds to the words the mind silently repeats. Rafaela realized that for years, she had been unwittingly reiterating, "I must endure, I cannot fail. If I stop, everything collapses." And her body responded precisely in kind, by collapsing, because no single person can sustain the weight of the world alone. In pursuit of healing, she began implementing a principle that was simple yet profound, exchanging survival phrases for phrases of permission. She started affirming, "I am allowed to rest. I may ask for help. I grant myself permission to live with ease." The transformation was not instantaneous, but it cleared an unexpected path. While attending one of the support groups, she recognized that many women were navigating the same pain yet lacked proper guidance. Consequently, over time, she began facilitating conversations, sharing circles, and virtual gatherings. Without consciously realizing it, she had cultivated a community. Out of this burgeoning community, an idea emerged: to channel her experiences and insights into a program focused on emotional self-care. Within a few months, that initial endeavor evolved into an essential component of her life's purpose. Today, Rafaela assists hundreds of individuals in restructuring their emotional lives. The crisis she had viewed as the greatest collapse of her personal history proved to be the gateway that unlocked the mission she had overlooked for her entire life. Just as Florence declared, pain is often only the breaking of the shell to liberate the seed of purpose. The 5th story concerns Lucas, a young man who dedicated years to a local neighborhood restaurant. He was highly dependable, arriving early, closing late, and handling a bit of everything: cashier duties, kitchen work, customer service, and deliveries. The owner trusted him implicitly, and one day mentioned his intention to hand over the business eventually. Lucas clung fiercely to that promise. He saved every penny, forwent further education, postponed major life plans, all while anticipating the opportunity he believed was rightfully his. However, 4 years later, a pivotal event occurred. The restaurant was sold to an outside party without any prior consultation. He learned of it through word of mouth. It was a profound betrayal. He felt that all his tireless effort had been rendered futile. He spent days struggling with insomnia. It was during this period that, late one random night, he stumbled upon an excerpt from Florence Scovel Shinn online, stating that, when a promise is unfulfilled, it is not a blessing, it is a distraction. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He recognized he had spent years holding on to an empty promise, convinced that his sole opportunity hinged upon another individual. And Florence was adamant. Abundance cannot be channeled through the hands of another. It originates from the consciousness of the receiver. With this phrase relentlessly echoing in his mind, Lucas resolved to attempt something audacious. Opening his own small delivery kitchen, specializing in the homemade pasta recipes he learned from his grandmother. He had no capital, no professional equipment, and no safety net, but he possessed conviction. He started on his home porch, utilizing 2 simple stoves and packaging purchased wholesale. For the first few days, orders were nearly non-existent. Yet, by applying Florence's principles, he maintained his unwavering confidence. He kept repeating, "What is rightfully mine comes to me without forced effort." A local influencer ordered his food by chance, loved it, and subsequently promoted it widely. Within a week, he received more orders than he could have possibly anticipated. 2 months later, he leased his first commercial space. The former boss's promise was never realized because it was not his true path. Life took nothing away. It merely restored his freedom to follow the correct trajectory. These narratives demonstrate how Florence's wisdom remains vibrant, resonant, applicable, and highly relevant today. Before we proceed with the complete technique, I want to ask something of you. If these stories are awakening something deep within you, if they are providing solace or inspiration, if you are realizing that perhaps nothing is as lost as it seems, please subscribe to the channel. Not merely because it helps the algorithm, but because here you will find a dedicated space that respects your journey, your struggles, your faith, and your timing. Furthermore, tell me in the comments, which of these accounts resonated with you the most? There is no need for an elaborate response. Simply share a sentence or a feeling. Sometimes, your comment illuminates the path for another individual who is currently navigating the exact same challenges you have already overcome. Now that you have encountered narratives of individuals who underwent transformation precisely when everything seemed to teeter on the brink of collapse, it is crucial to grasp the pivotal tenet of Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. Life is not driven by outward appearances, but by the concealed meaning. Every seeming disruption may, in fact, be an invitation onto a more congruent path. To discern this invitation, Florence taught something fundamental. One must shift the paradigm through which events are viewed. She deeply believed that external reality is merely the delayed reflection of an already established inner reality. Consequently, when you transform your consciousness, you inherently change your trajectory. And it is here that we begin to delve deeper into the technique that countless individuals have applied over decades to transform seemingly insurmountable predicaments into unexpected opportunities. The initial step, preceding the technique itself, is the realization of a simple yet potent truth. You are not being punished, you are being guided. This shift in perspective fundamentally alters both what you attract and what you allow into your life. Florence asserted that faith reorganizes invisible forces. When you hold a certain thought, everything mobilizes to confirm that thought. Hence, when an individual believes they are plagued by ill fortune, they begin to find evidence of misfortune everywhere. Conversely, when they believe they are blessed, even minor everyday occurrences become miracles. The mind interprets the world according to the lens it chooses. Such is the case of Joanna, a young woman who worked as a commercial assistant at a large corporation. At 28, like many young adults, she coveted stability. Yet, a peculiar phenomenon began to unfold. Despite her dedicated effort, her results consistently fell short of expectations. Regardless of how much she studied or strove for improvement, it seemed as though some invisible force undermined all her efforts. This caused her profound frustration, and the more frustrated she became, the worse her performance plummeted. It was her mother who introduced her to Florence Scovel Shinn's philosophy, positing that perhaps the issue lay not with the company or the market, but with how Joanna had internalized her self-perception. Her mother asked, "Do you realize you never truly believe you deserve success? You perpetually anticipate failure. And that is precisely what materializes." Joanna was stunned. She had never considered that her internal disposition might be sabotaging her external life. She resolved to do what seemed too simplistic to be effective, replacing the thoughts that crippled her with words that bolstered her. Every morning, she affirmed, "I deserve to thrive. The perfect path finds me effortlessly. Everything I undertake flourishes." Initially, it felt contrived, but she persevered, because Florence taught that such is the mechanism. One does not repeat because one already believes. One repeats in order to commence believing. And as the repetition became second nature, something remarkable transpired. Joanna began to be perceived in a new light within the company. She received an invitation to join a project and was subsequently assigned to a new, more creative department, one more fundamentally in alignment with her true interests. Before long, her performance, which had previously been erratic, became the benchmark. She realized that she was no longer the insecure employee who dreaded every report. She was someone who trusted her own inherent worth and delivered results with fluidity. She had grasped a concept Florence taught a century ago. Life responds to the vibration you sustain, not the fear you attempt to conceal. Another powerful case study is that of Mauro, a man who had always been convinced that happiness was the exclusive domain of others. He grew up hearing that he had to settle for mediocrity, because people of his background couldn't possibly anticipate much success. Unconsciously, he carried this debilitating mindset into every area of his life. At 47, he was stuck in a job he disliked, persisted in a relationship that had long ceased to be meaningful, and yet harbored a deep-seated fear of losing it all. Life seemed a strenuous effort merely to survive, not to actually live. One day, while standing in a bank line, he overheard an elderly woman discussing Florence Scovel Shinn and the potency of self-image. She was saying that a person never receives more than what they fundamentally believe they deserve. Mauro felt as though the statement had been spoken directly to him. He returned home disquieted. That evening, he researched Florence and was particularly moved by a principle concerning the mental mold. Florence taught that the mind creates invisible molds and that reality then arranges itself to fill those molds. If the mold is small, life remains small. If the mold is expansive, life expands accordingly. Inspired by this, Mauro undertook an exercise that seemed preposterous. He wrote in detail what his ideal life would look like: a job with meaning, a harmonious relationship, a healthy body, time for himself. He had never allowed these desires to exist without accompanying guilt. From that point on, something began to shift. He sought out courses, conversed with friends, and observed subtle signs. And, without forcing anything, a vacancy at another company emerged. He submitted his resume, participated in the interview, and, against all expectations, was hired. The salary was higher, but more crucially, the environment was stimulating, nurturing, and human. Months later, he found the courage to end the relationship that no longer served him, and for the first time in his life, he felt he was truly taking the helm of his own narrative. Florence used to say that life takes no pleasure in keeping anyone small. It merely responds to what a person believes is possible. By changing his conviction, Mauro changed his trajectory. There is also another essential component to Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings: inspired action. She asserted that faith without action turns into mere fantasy, and action without faith leads to sheer exhaustion. The balance lies in acting from a place of inner clarity. This is what happened to Ana Beatriz, a musician who always dreamed of earning a living through her art but remained confined to random jobs unrelated to her innate talent. She was paralyzed by the fear of failure, the fear of exposure, and the fear of taking risks. When she encountered Florence's writings, she grasped a transformative concept: talent is a door that only opens when you decide to walk through it. She began repeating daily, "My gift paves my way." She felt compelled to post short singing snippets on social media, and despite the throbbing fear, she decided to act. The first video garnered few views. The second did too. But she persisted, not for the outcome, but for the inspiration she felt. Then, a music producer from another city stumbled upon one of her videos and reached out. Months later, she was already participating in projects she had never imagined. Abundance arrived through her talent, but that talent only flourished because she possessed the courage to act. These examples demonstrate that transformation stems not just from intellectual comprehension, but from application. Florence often reiterated that the human mind tends to revert to the familiar, which is why repetition is so crucial. It is akin to training a spiritual muscle that gradually alters your relationship with everything. With work, with family, with money, and with yourself. By grasping that consciousness shapes experience, we begin to realize that nothing occurs in isolation. Every circumstance carries a message, every closure carries a direction, every apparent delay harbors a silent preparation. Florence Scovel Shinn explained that the universe is precise, like an ancient timepiece. Nothing is delayed, nothing is hastened. Everything unfolds at the precise moment a person creates the internal space to receive it. Life does not respond to desperate entreaties, but rather to the steady vibration of one who knows they are deserving and who trusts. To illustrate this, there is a compelling story of a woman named Laís. She was 45 when she found herself facing a painful rupture. A relationship spanning over a decade came to an end without clear explanations. Her partner simply withdrew, stating he needed time. Laís was devastated. The house felt cavernous without him. The bed seemed frigid. The silence felt cruel. She felt as though something vital had been torn away from her. And it is precisely in such moments that Florence's teachings become most challenging, for they demand that you find meaning where none appears to exist. A friend told her, "Read Florence Scovel Shinn. She teaches you to see not abandonment, but liberation." Laís initially recoiled. The pain was too immense to accept such platitudes, but she began reading nonetheless. Gradually, she realized she had constructed her entire life around someone else, rather than around herself. As she began to rediscover herself, listen to her inner voice, and acknowledge her own desires, she recognized that the relationship had, in fact, been disconnected for a long time. In one of the passages she read, Florence stated, "Do not fear when a door slams shut. It only slams forcefully when you lack the courage to close it yourself." That resonated profoundly. Laís embarked on a process of internal reconstruction, a reclaiming of the person she was before conforming to another's routine. She returned to dancing, resumed painting, and began engaging with new people. The pain did not vanish instantly, but it ceded space for something unprecedented, a joy that originated within herself, not from an external source. 2 years later, Laís met someone who truly saw her, and this time, she was whole. She no longer needed to be chosen. She had chosen herself first. And by choosing herself, she attracted a genuine partnership. Looking back, she realized the separation was not a tragedy. It was a retrieval. A second powerful example is that of Rodrigo, a photographer who had worked for years in event photography. He was talented, dedicated, and well regarded in his city. But when the local economy faltered, many clients vanished. Suddenly, Rodrigo faced entire months without contracts. His fear intensified daily. With every week unemployed, he felt less worthy, less capable, less of an artist. On one of those gray days, he discovered an old notebook where he had jotted down motivational quotes. Among them was a quote from Florence, "What you seek is seeking you." He closed his eyes and asked himself, "What am I truly seeking?" And the answer struck him instantly. He had never wanted to photograph events. He had always wanted to photograph people. Faces, stories, expressions, feelings. But he never had the courage to follow that calling because event work felt secure. Now that nothing felt secure, perhaps it was time to do what he had always desired. He decided to convert his garage into a small, makeshift studio, simple and without luxury. He began photographing neighborhood residents free of charge, purely to build a new portfolio. Every face he photographed reignited something beautiful within him. When he published the initial images on social media, people were captivated. These were photographs that possessed soul, capturing silent truths. Within a few weeks, he started receiving requests for individual, family, and corporate photo sessions. His income, which had previously fluctuated perilously, began to grow steadily. More than that, Rodrigo rediscovered the joy in his work. He realized that the scarcity he so feared was not a punishment. It was the necessary impetus for him to finally honor his true gift. Florence taught that abundance flows where purpose is honored, and Rodrigo's story confirms this in every detail. There is also the story of Miriam, a 58-year-old woman who had spent her entire life working as a seamstress. She had always dreamed of opening a small atelier, but never believed she had the adequate age, capital, or training. Until, one ordinary day, the factory where she worked closed its doors permanently. It felt like a punch to the gut. She wept, felt fear, and experienced profound helplessness. However, while seeking support in social media groups, she stumbled upon a video discussing the teachings of Florence Scovel Shinn and the power of turning an apparent ending into a new beginning. She heard a phrase that hammered in her mind: "The universe never takes away without delivering something greater, provided you allow it." Utilizing the meager severance pay she received, she purchased a bolt of cloth, 2 pre-owned machines, and set up a table in her front room. She began crafting unique, creative pieces, distinct from everything she had previously produced. She posted a few photos online without any real expectation. Yet, the unforeseen occurred. The pieces instantly went viral within a local group. Within a short time frame, she already had a waiting list. Today, Miriam operates a small but charming studio, living the life she always aspired to, not due to sheer luck, but because she was compelled to consider a possibility she had previously overlooked. The factory certainly closed, yes, but a dream opened up. The wall she perceived as an end was, in reality, the portal that granted passage to her ultimate purpose. And these examples illustrate something foundational that Florence explained with great subtlety. The universe does not destroy anyone, it expands them. However, in order to expand, it sometimes necessitates the dismantling of obsolete structures, entrenched beliefs, and routines that no longer support the person you are evolving into. It is discomforting, yet essential. It is painful, yet ultimately liberating. This is precisely why the transformative technique taught by Florence proves so effective. It does not eliminate reality. Rather, it alters the manner in which you navigate within it. It shifts you away from the posture of victimhood and positions you as a conscious creator. It instructs you to observe pain without identifying with it, to confront the ensuing chaos without being subsumed by it, to maintain faith, not because every aspect is effortless, but because everything is actively being reorganized. When you begin inhabiting this elevated state of consciousness, something extraordinary starts to unfold. You become magnetic. The appropriate people start materializing, crucial conversations begin to surface, and ideas germinate as if they were gently carried on the wind. It is not sorcery. It is alignment. Florence consistently reiterated, when the mind is ready, the path appears. And it is precisely this state of readiness that you are cultivating here, right now, as you listen to these accounts. When you start to apprehend that nothing occurs by chance, that every movement in life carries a greater significance, Florence Scovel Shinn's technique ceases to be merely an appealing philosophy and transforms into a living practice. It becomes something you feel intrinsically, something that shifts the way you breathe, the way you react, the way you traverse the world. Fundamentally, what Florence taught was simple. You create reality not through exertion, but through consciousness. And when consciousness shifts, life responds, sometimes gently, sometimes intensely, but always with absolute precision. It is at this juncture that we enter the final phase of this journey. How to practically apply that which countless individuals have, over the years, translated into tangible transformation. For Florence, transformation begins with acceptance. Not the acceptance of defeat, but the acceptance of reality. It means confronting what lies before you without exaggeration, without minimizing, and without shielding yourself behind drama or denial. To accept is to lift the veil. It is to courageously assess the facts and declare, this is happening, and yet it does not define me. From this clarity emerges the second imperative: gratitude. Gratitude not for what transpired, but for what is being shaped behind the scenes. Gratitude for what will materialize once this process concludes. Gratitude is the key that unlocks the invisible vault of abundance. One of the most poignant stories illustrating this is that of Silvia, 63. After working for decades as a librarian, she dreamed of retiring and traveling. However, just months on the cusp of retirement, she discovered that the institution's financial plan was becoming insolvent. A portion of her annuity would be reduced. Silvia felt the ground give way beneath her. She had dedicated her entire life, and at the very moment she anticipated reaping the rewards, she received devastating news. Rage consumed her entirely. Yet, that same week, her niece sent her an article about Florence Scovel Shinn. Silvia began reading with skepticism. After all, nothing felt more palpable than the loss of that money. Over the ensuing days, however, something began to soften within her. One of the quotes that most profoundly resonated with Silvia stated, "Nothing can be taken from one who lives in the consciousness of divine provision. What appears to be loss is merely the old form yielding to the perfect form." That sentence reverberated within her like an indelible tune. Instead of mentally repeating the mantra, "I have lost everything," she began to repeat, with initial difficulty, "The best is yet to come." It was not rationally sound, but it was emotionally and spiritually resonant. And that is when an unforeseen development occurred. Silvia had always enjoyed narrating stories to children, though she never considered it a professional endeavor. One day, while observing one of her granddaughters struggling to read a book, she had a spontaneous idea: to host voluntary reading sessions in parks, simply to try something new. On the first day, 2 children appeared. On the second, 6. On the third, 12. Parents began asking if she could conduct workshops, and she started to outline a simple structure. Months later, a local NGO invited Silvia to spearhead a literacy initiative targeting public schooling. The remuneration not only exceeded the financial loss she had incurred from her retirement reduction, but also provided a higher, stable income, and included travel to cultural engagements, precisely what she had always desired. Life did not revert her retirement to the form she had envisioned. It returned something superior, something vibrant, something purpose-driven. Florence asserted that blessings arrive through the doors you least expect. And Silvia discovered this through practical experience. Another core tenet of the technique is the potent question. Not, "Why is this happening to me?" but rather, "For what purpose is this happening for me?" It is a subtle grammatical shift, yet one that yields a monumental vibrational impact. When you inquire, "Why?" you adopt the posture of a victim. When you inquire, "For what purpose?" you assume the role of the learner. And the learner invariably discovers an egress, purpose, and direction. Consider the case of Breno, age 39. He served as a manager at a communications firm, where he had been employed for over 15 years. He enjoyed professional stability, congenial colleagues, and a predictable routine. However, one day he received notice that the company would be integrated into another entity, and his position would subsequently be eliminated. He received severance pay, yet it was insufficient to allay his feelings of insecurity. He immediately succumbed to panic. For weeks, Breno diligently attempted to submit resumes and seek comparable opportunities, but nothing materialized. The harder he strove for control, the more life seemed to reach an impasse. It was then, while watching a video about Florence Scovel Shinn, that he heard the maxim, "When nothing moves on the exterior, it is because something needs to shift internally." He realized he was attempting to replicate a trajectory that had already run its course. He posed a sincere question to himself: "What do I truly desire to do?" The answer was so self-evident that he nearly chuckled. He had always harbored dreams of working in the culinary arts. Since his youth, cooking was as instinctive to him as breathing. Yet, he had never mustered the fortitude to change careers. The layoff placed him at a critical juncture: sustain the obsolete or make room for the novel. Breno resolved to attempt something modest, selling healthy, prepared meals, marmitas, that he cooked himself. He began by serving his neighbors. Subsequently, residents in the immediate vicinity. Then, nearby businesses. In under a year, his nascent venture evolved into an organized professional kitchen, complete with established clientele and frequent contracts. The termination, which had initially seemed tragic, manifested as a flawless realignment, not for the worse, but emphatically for the better. This constitutes the fourth movement of the technique, the decree. The spoken word possesses creative efficacy. Florence reiterated this point persistently, understanding that many individuals request novel outcomes while still upholding obsolete vocabulary. They continually voice expressions of fear, skepticism, and trepidation. The word shapes the vibration, and the vibration, in turn, molds reality. Consequently, she posited that one must decree what one desires, not what one dreads. To decree signifies establishing internally what is true, even prior to witnessing the result. Following this is inspired action, which originates not from desperation, but from inner clarity. It is the stride that life demands once you achieve alignment. Occasionally, this entails a major undertaking. At other times, it is something as rudimentary as sending a message, streamlining a drawer, going for a constitutional, or opening a document and commencing to write. Inspired action does not deplete energy. Rather, it regenerates it. It does not necessitate force. It simply flows. And finally, we arrive at non-attachment. This is the element many find challenging to master. It involves releasing the necessity of defining the how. It means relinquishing the compulsion to micromanage every variable. It requires letting go of the anxiety surrounding the outcome. As Florence used to say, the universe does not operate under human pressure, it operates under permission. And when you release control, you inherently create the necessary space for miracles to manifest. Now, having navigated these insights, I want to invite you to something vitally important. Take a deep breath and allow these narratives to settle within you. Transformation does not occur simply because you have heard something. It occurs because you have opened yourself up to it. And if you find yourself here, it is because a part of you is already yearning for metamorphosis. Therefore, I wholeheartedly ask you, please subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, nor as a hollow ritual, but because here you have a sanctuary dedicated to nurturing your spirit, your faith, and your hope. And please share with me in the comments as well. What profound realization did you reach about yourself while listening to this video? Which narrative spoke most powerfully to you? Which area of your life is currently undergoing a silent redirection? Your willingness to share might just be the illumination someone else desperately needs. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that, when you align yourself with spiritual truth, abundance has no choice, it must come. May your life unfold like a blossoming field after a long rain. May every closed door reveal the perfect path forward. May every perceived loss transform into the blessing you are not yet able to perceive. So be it, and so it is fulfilled.